You can see that it's like today. Showcases with all kinds of objects that you can see when you come in the shop, and you could buy out of stock. These things were not known. People that are looking to silver and that are working with silver, like I do, never think out of this angle. So I thought, well, this is a very interesting way, because it will give you clues why certain objects look like they do. And what we found out, I worked with another guy together. He went into the archives. What we found out was that often shops possessed the models, for example, for little cast elements of the objects, like feet or notices, rims. It means that you can find these forms in objects of different silversmiths, because these models were owned by the shopkeeper. So then you understand that the role of the silversmith is a little bit different from what you thought before. And now I'm talking about the huge amount of silversmith. Then you had a small group that considered themselves already in the 17th century as being artists, sculptors, namely Lutma. And doing this research in the archives to understand how it worked with these shops, we dived into the archives of the guild, the organization of the crafts. And in the middle of the 17th century, Lutma Jr., who had this shop with atelier with his father, he made a manifest with the two other leading guys of the guild. There were always three leading silversmiths who were organizing the guild, and Lutma Jr. was one of them. They made a manifest in which they wrote that it wasn't just that silver was valued only on its weight, and that the artistic invention wasn't calculated in it. And he considered himself as an artist, and he was talking about the inventors and the huge amount of followers who were following these inventions of this small group of leading silversmith artists. So if you're looking at the idea of these shops and what you could buy there, small objects, bigger objects that were bought out of stock, and on the other hand, the artists, sculptors, silversmith who were only working in order for certain people, then you get a different view on the field. And that's what I tried to do, writing this book, making this exhibition.
Amsterdam was a very significant, and remains a very significant, gold and silver town, if you will. Mm-hmm. Why is this true?
You say it's still an important silver city? I think probably that's not true, because the role of silver is not at all what it used to be. Silver trade also was a sort of private banking. You could have your money transformed into objects, and the reason in the past, and the reason that silver objects have hallmarks, is only the guarantee that your silver object has the value of money of the day you have it, you want to change it. So a coin had its value in weight, silver in weight. The working on silver was very cheap. So you could have your money melted into silver, and have your silver transformed into objects. And a lot of people did that. So it had another role than just being a pretty object you could use, but it was also a way of putting your money into objects you could show off with. And in the middle of the 19th century, the relation of this value to the weight was changed. And so little by little, that role of silver changed and vanished. Of course, nowadays we have the industries, and you can make objects that are much stronger, that don't blacken like silver is doing, and this together with the fact that the value is not what it the value it's difficult to explain in English. This meaning of silver in terms of money is not doesn't exist anymore. So in the beginning of the 19th century, there were more than 400 silversmiths working in Amsterdam, and it was a very important center. And now I don't know how many, but maybe 20, 30. I wouldn't know, but I don't think it's very important anymore.
I've been told that as the VOC first went out to do their trading with the East, that when they encountered like the Chinese who they wanted to trade with, that the Chinese were really not interested in any of the objects that were brought from Europe. They considered them to be somewhat inferior, and what they really wanted was silver. It was the common basis of trade. Now, was this silver trade in that sense in any way related to the vast working of silver, or changing your silver into money or money into silver, related to the trade that was so significant in the 17th century?
Well, in a way, of course, it was. If I understand your question well, the trade brought in huge amounts of money, and the change went very quickly. So all of a sudden, people in Holland, and especially in Amsterdam, because of their trading, became extremely rich, started building all these palazzi at the waterside, the canals, and they had to decorate it with art, and especially with silver, because silver is the material to show off your new wealth. So you had all these new rich people who wanted to show their wealth to the world, to each other, but to the world. And so that's this money is always a very the condition for art to emerge. But apart from the fact that money came in, there was another reason that the arts had such a special level, and that's because of the fact that this money worked as a magnet for a lot of the good artists in Europe, who were not only good and skilled, but also were adventurous and were strong people. So they came to Amsterdam, and most of the silversmiths and the goldsmiths came from countries like Germany, France, even Russia, Sweden. And they all came to Amsterdam, and together they created a whole new style and a level of the arts, like you see in painting as well, in sculpture. Well, in all the arts, in fact, in architecture.
Now, this style that you're referring to, that we're talking about, that was created by Lutma and some of his followers, how would you describe that, and in what way is it significantly different than, say, the classicism that, or the classic art that was actually in vogue at that time?
Well, you are referring to what is called auricular style, kwapstijl in Dutch, and it's a style that is indeed very brutal, anti-classical. It's derived from nature, even from the human body, from anatomy, like the ears, the curves of the ear, the plies of the skin, even the inside of a skull. Like Lutma made a bowl in the form of an open skull. And if you think of Rembrandt, of his painting, The Lesson of Dr. Dijman, which is also a painting of an open body, of a dead corpse of a crook, in which they can see what the hidden world inside a human being. So they were very interested in that. So it's a form of decoration that is derived from nature, and it's interesting in in the changing of the centuries, the styles always go back to classical antiquity because that was the rule, the ideal set of forms was found in the classical antiquity. But of course, artists get bored with these severe rules, and so in all the time after some years, you see a style that's going against it. For example, the Rococo, the 18th century style, is also very much against this classical antiquity, and later on the Art Nouveau also. Sorry, ik denk dat ik even op moet nemen.
Now, the show itself is called Gold and Silver. How did gold, in the same way, differ from the silver production at that time?
Gold, a flourishing time for gold was the 18th century. The Huguenots, the French refugees, they controlled the whole gold market. And in gold, you see the changing of the fashion, because the whole 18th century is characterized by the changing fashions that came from the court of France. The style of Louis XIV, the 15th, the Rococo, Louis XVI. In art history, that's very important and very interesting to look at these changing fashions. So the tone was set by the French in the 18th century. The goldsmith coming from France started to implement these new fashions before the rest did. So this is one of the reasons that gold is in advance, talking about this fashion, some 10, 15 years. Another thing about this gold market was that most of the objects made of gold are accessories to clothing, like snuff boxes and belts, etc. Objects that you have close to the body. And as you know, fashion occurs the first in clothing. So the second part to go with it were these accessories. So the gold is always first in changing fashion. What we found out is that the circle of these French Huguenots had a lot of contact with other circles of French goldsmiths, for example in London. And they even ordered parts of these objects they made in Holland, in Amsterdam. They even ordered parts of it in London. So that you see, for example, the top of an object, the dexel, is from a London goldsmith, even signed, as the rest is made by a goldsmith of Amsterdam. And at first we didn't really understand why, but after doing research, we found letters of these goldsmiths from Amsterdam who were visiting their relatives or their colleagues in London, and so they had a lot of contact. So that's about the gold trade.
Now there was, as you say, the French were more or less the 18th century. In the 19th century, the English took over. And what was the significant difference as the influence, say, of France in the previous generation, now England? How did that differ, and what was the significant change?
Well, what happened was, it's quite funny. It's really about making money. Doing research in the archives of the guild, which was really the police of the gold and silversmith, we found letters of the guild that was giving penalties to two brothers, Dumont, also French, who were shopkeepers. And they started, at the end of the 18th century, they started to import English silver, which was, of course, harming the silversmith from Amsterdam. There were more than 400 silversmiths working at that moment, so it was an important craft. And so they got penalties because they had to pay a lot of money to import it. So it means that the customer in Amsterdam didn't want French-styled silver anymore, but was more interested in English silver. For what reason? So the reaction was that the brothers Dumont and others started to sell Dutch silver in English style. And the English style of that moment was quite simple with little decoration and smooth surfaces, a geometrical design. And the Dutch did it like the English, but they went further. They went further in its simplicity. And also they invented new functions for the objects, like a coffee filter machine and other kind of objects. Another important thing about these undecorated objects is that the silver could be delivered now in prefabricated plates, which you could fold to geometrical forms, whereas before you had a piece of silver that had to be hammered flat and hammered up. But at that moment, it changed, and you could buy prefab plates. So it means that they started working with models like you do when you make a coat, when you make clothes. You understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. So this is also one of the reasons that the design changed. So it's a combination of facts. But the fact is that the silver from that period is really recognizable by its undecorated forms, and it looks as if it has been made today, or in the period of industrial design. But industrial design wasn't there yet. I mean, there was no industry. It was just starting a little bit in England, but it was just before. So it's a funny combination of facts.
Now, could you tell us how long this exhibit will be on and when the people can come and see it?
It's till the 26th of March, and then it's over, and 80% of the pieces will go back to the storage, and 20% will be seen in the museum as always. But then it will be less eminent than it's now.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.